Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 9th episode of SecuriTEA Crumpets, where we host security professionals each month to talk about different security topics. Today, I am delighted to have Clint Gibler on the show. Clint has a Ph.D. in computer science from UCDavis. Clint has worked as a software engineer, a security consultant, and was the research and technical director at the NCC Group. Clint is currently the head of security research at R2C, which develops a very popular static analysis tool, Semgrep, which we'll talk about today. Clint is the co-founder of the TLDR newsletter, which aggregates and distills the best content for security tools, blogs, which help you do your job better and faster. Welcome, Clint. Welcome to the stream.
Thanks for having me, Lewis. I don't know, like during your description, I don't know. I was like, I guess I'll just stand here and smile. But yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for being here today. So what I want to talk about today, so like obviously we're going to talk about Semgrep, we're going to talk about your security background, but first, obviously for SecuriTEA Crumpets, I like to do my research. I look at, person coming on LinkedIn, and obviously looking at your LinkedIn, I noticed that you once in your past life was doing things in improv comedy and now. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot about security today, but let's kind of lighten the mood a little bit and talk about what you were doing in the past and, just talk about that. It sounds really interesting to me.
Sure. Yeah. It kind of started by accident, to be honest. So when I was in high school, I really liked Whose Line Is It Anyway, which is a popular TV show with Wayne Brady, Ryan Stiles, and others, Colin Mockery. And I just thought it was very funny, very like organic, very creative, and it was something that I always thought would be really fun to do, but I never had the opportunity to. And then, actually, my freshman year of college, during the sort of welcome weeks, the improv troupe on campus had a show, and I happened to attend. And I thought it was like so amazing, so funny, and I just fell in love with it immediately. And at the end of the show, they said, "Hey, we're having auditions next week, so feel free to come and audition if you want to." So I was very nervous about it, having done basically no theater and no improv ever. But I went in, I auditioned, and happened to get very lucky and got on the troupe. Um, we hypothesized that so there were a couple of other people who auditioned and made it on the same year, and we were all about the same height and had like similar sort of longer curly hair at the time. And we joked that they sort of let the three of us on at the same time because they liked one of us and they weren't sure which one. So they just had to let us all on at the same time. But yeah, so it's sort of I felt very lucky and very privileged to get on, and then I continued doing that all through college, so for 4 years, and I ended up adding sort of like a theater minor because um, I found that like doing more sort of like character work was very helpful for improv. So a lot of, I think, theater people do improv to help with their acting. I did acting to help with my improv, which I think is probably not what most people do. But yeah, it just became sort of like one of my favorite hobbies, and I continued doing it through grad school, and then I've actually did it for a few years in San Francisco as well. So it's something that it's probably one of my favorite things to do. But just started doing it randomly, but kept it up.
Nice. I have to say I have two questions to that. One is security related, and one is just what was your favorite one that you've done in San Francisco, like with your improv style?
Yeah, so there's a couple different types of improv, and then I guess there's like subgenres, sort of like how security is very broad and there's like many niches. Like improv also has sort of things within it. So there's a short form improv, which is kind of like Whose Line Is It Anyway, where you have self-contained improv games that have sort of like a structure. For example, like Irish Drinking Song is like a song that, oh, I guess also this is weird to say to you. Sorry, this is the name of the thing. I didn't create this.
Okay.
But it's like there's like a song with a structure and there's like a writing scheme, or there's like party quirks where someone comes in and the guests are all weird and the host has to guess sort of what endowments the audience has given to them. So short form is usually like pretty structured, like 3 to 5 minute sort of bits. And then there's a long form improv, which is more more theatery, less structured, more organic. And I ended up liking that style a little bit more because I think you have greater artistic flexibility in terms of you can sort of play with the genre a little bit more, and you're not as confined to this many people for this length of time, but rather you can maybe create a piece over like half an hour or an hour.
Got it.
So I don't know if that answered your question.
It did. Yeah. My next question is kind of security related, but like I'm assuming something like improv would really help with like social engineering in some sense, because you kind of have to be like quick-witted and you need to like think of things fast sometimes, and have very good responses and good like kind of background stories around like particular things, right? So I could imagine like that being helpful in like a kind of social engineering perspective, trying to break into buildings or get behind people, getting like do like tailgating and such.
Yeah, I haven't done actually that much of that work, but I do think it would be helpful for that. Actually, my friend Rachel Toback, who is fairly popular on Twitter for doing vishing and social engineering and things like that, and I think she got second in the DEF CON social engineering CTF for like 2 years in a row or something. Anyway, so she and I actually met through improv, and only later we realized we were like, oh, we're also both in security, so that's interesting.
Very cool.
But yeah, I think she credits improv with part of the reason. Obviously, she also studies like cognitive science and psychology and a bunch of other things, which also make her better. But I think improv helps.
Got it. Yeah, I remember seeing the YouTube video of her where she basically like had the crying baby video in the background kind of thing to be able to like get into someone's like, I believe, like either voicemail or change their like telephone like ownership to them or something, which is quite funny. Yeah. Okay, so that's actually awesome. I'm guessing anyone who watches this stream either now or on YouTube probably didn't expect us to talk about improv. So hopefully you learned something new, because I did. I didn't know there was different types of improv, which is super cool. So now let's move into TLDRsec. So you are the co-creator of TLDRsec, and I would say it's one of the more popular newsletters, and people love to see the content all the time. I personally love to see like a very condensed piece of information. So could you just explain what TLDRsec is, because some people may not know what it is, and what was the backstory there?
Sure. Yeah, it's and also thank you. I'm glad you like it. It always makes me feel good to hear people find it useful. Yeah, so basically, it's a free weekly newsletter that you can find at tldrsec.com, which basically just tries to take sort of the best new talks or blog posts or tools and sort of write like what are the key takeaways for these? Like, what do you need to know, and what do these things do? And put them into sort of one weekly email. So the origin of it is sort of by accident. I found I was at NCC Group at the time, and I found that I kept sharing like groups of links to people. I was like, oh, hey, like you just asked me about OAuth. Like here's like my 5 favorite OAuth links, or oh, here's some latest stuff that I found. And I realized, just sending one-off emails is not very scalable. And I found oftentimes I was sharing similar links with like many people. So it started just as a way to sort of scale something that I was doing already, where I was like, hey, I'm already doing the work to collect these things. Maybe I can share it with other people and see if they find it useful. And basically what happens is I spend probably like 10 to 20 hours a week reading the best security articles I can find from, say, Twitter, Reddit, Hacker News. I think I subscribe to like 10 to 15 other security newsletters. So I also like read all of those. And I try to make it basically the most dense, useful security thing you can read every week. At least that's my goal. I don't always achieve it, but that's sort of my target. And yeah, the goal is specifically for like technical security people. There are a number of things that cover like, hey, here's like security events, here's the latest ransomware and stuff like that, or here's the latest breach. And that's not really the focus. The focus is more like you're a security professional who wants to read about like technical security things, and so that's what I do. I mean, basically, it's the newsletter that I would subscribe to if I wasn't writing it. And Scott Piper had a summit route a number of years ago, which I also subscribed to and I thought was excellent, and in many ways was kind of the inspiration, I think, for TLDRsec. And Daniel Miessler is something that I still read to this day, a friend who I'm a big fan of his newsletter as well.
that the unsupervised learning stuff, or is that?
Yeah. So Daniel Miessler's unsupervised learning, Marco Lancini's CloudSec list. There's a bunch of good ones, but those are some of my favorite right now.
Got it. So if you're watching this on the stream, we'll make sure that this is on the YouTube, those links, so you can check them out as well. So that's really interesting. So I also assume Route Summit was Scott is kind of really into AWS and stuff, so I'm assuming it was related to mostly cloud related things for the summit. Okay, got it. Cool. So we talked about what TLDRsec is, but what a lot of people probably don't understand is probably the challenges that it took for you to kind of build a large audience. Because what were the early days of starting out with TLDRsec? Were you daunted by like getting, let's say you released the first one, like how many viewers did you get in the first, or like, engagement, like clicks, people going through the website, etc., or like reading the email, for example? What did that kind of look like at the beginning?
So I think the first couple were sent out to about 30 people, or maybe like 10, that were mostly just friends of mine. That I was like, hey, I'm starting this thing, can I please add you? And they didn't actually sign up. I just like manually added them in MailChimp. So I read a little bit, like I was like, okay, well, I've never really done regular blogging. I've never done a newsletter. So I tried to read some resources from people who'd done it, and sort of tried to learn some of their tips and tricks. And one of the things that they emphasized, there's a book from, I think, Pragmatic bookstore called like Technical Blogging Second Edition or something. And basically, one of the messages in it was like, if you're going to try to blog, or in this case, newsletter, like commit to doing it for a year, regardless of how much traction you get, before stopping. Because basically, like the first number of posts are going to get very little traction, and you can only, in most cases, start seeing whether this is actually going to be successful or not, like after a year. So that's kind of maybe depressing to think about. But I was like, well, this person knows what they're doing. I will also commit to like doing this for a year to see how it goes. And I would say definitely early growth was like super hard and slow. I think I told you about this previously, but one week I spent, I think, like 20 to 30 hours on this one newsletter. It was like number 10 or something, like very early. And I was like really proud of it. I was like so happy with it. I was like, this is my best one yet. I had all these great links. I thought my analysis of it was really useful. And I was like, yes, I crushed it. So I sent it out. And in the next few days, I got 0 new subscribers. And I was like, no. And like some people read it, but it was not like a crazy amount. It was like, tens of people, or like 100 or 200 people or something. And that was like, I'm not going to lie to you, I was like kind of depressed for like a day or two, because I was like, man, I spent so much time and nobody cared. And then, so contrasting that with like now, I would say on average, it grows, TLDRsec grows like 50 to 200 like a week or so.
Oh, wow.
So it sort of depends, like if people share it, or if like it makes it into like a new pocket of people who haven't heard of it before. To be honest, the growth is like kind of a bit random. Sometimes it'll grow like 0 or like a handful in a day. A couple of days ago, it randomly grew like 50 or 70 in a day, and I'm like, I don't even know why. So the short of it is, if you want to do something like this, the growth rate is, it's not exponential, but I would emphasize the beginning part of that graph, which is like very slow. So I think in the first 6 months to 9 months, it probably grew to like a few hundred. But now it'll grow a few hundred in maybe like 1 month. So I think concretely, I think I was at like 4,500 January 1st of this year, and then now I think I'm a little over 7,000. But so for like 35 or 4,500 to 7,000 in like a few months, whereas that was like probably a year and a half of time previously. So I don't know. I guess if you want to do it, commit to doing the work, and it's okay if it's super slow because it's always slow at the beginning. Like for everyone, that's what everyone says, and I would concur.
Yeah, I have a friend who's been working on like building like a YouTube series, and I think they sent me like a screenshot of their how many viewers, how many interactions they had, how many like how what the length of the viewing time was and stuff, and I was like just like, don't look at that. Like the thing is, like, you're creating content because you think it's going to be useful, and you should do it for the process and the enjoyment to begin with, at least, because you haven't found your market yet. You haven't found who's going to be interested in it. Like, it's fine. Like, you can just use it as your own reference. Like, well, I know what I'm talking about because of X, Y, and Z as well. So it kind of can be used for that mentality as well. Like the same for like, I think this podcast, so SecuriTEA and Crumpets, it currently has, for the first like 4 episodes, it had maybe uh, like 5 subscribers. And now, yeah, so I mean, 5 was great. I was happy with just 1, and it wasn't my mum because she doesn't know how to use computers, so it's okay. And then then obviously I still only have like 120 or something like that, but that's, I started in January. It's now, getting close to July, and 100 and something, where I still think that's a pretty big achievement regardless of
that's huge. Yeah, congrats. That's awesome.
I mean, yeah, thank you. But yeah, so let's now move on to so obviously, so why do you think it's now growing so much? Is it because you're already at the peak of where there's so many people looking at it, and like being shared by, like, through mutual engagement, or do you just think it's just dynamically grows because of how it's being shared and stuff?
Yeah. So one thing is, and I think this was like a hard lesson for me to learn, and maybe for like a lot of the other sort of technical security professionals listening. But I would say having very solid technical security content is a requirement, but it's not sufficient. So for someone to share your work, it needs to be good, obviously. And but just being very good doesn't make it widely shared. Like, for example, everything I write now is more widely shared than it used to be, but I wouldn't say my work is that much better than it used to be. Like, certainly doing it a lot has made me better and faster and more efficient, but I wouldn't say I'm like, my content is like 10x better than it used to be. It's just that you have enough people interacting with what you create, such that, say, if 1% of the people recommend it to someone else, like as that 1% gets bigger, then like your growth is bigger. So I wouldn't say it's like an exponential curve, but I would say it's maybe better than linear slightly, or at the very least linear, where the more people who are seeing it, the more likely some percentage of those people are going to share it. So again, no one's going to share it if it's not good. So like the base table stakes are that it's good. But that alone is unfortunately not, well, so over the long term, that is enough for it to be widely shared, but in the short term, it's not. So I don't know. I know, like, marketing people often talk about like distribution and like getting it in front of a lot of people, which as a technical person, I kind of like poo-pooed for a long time. I was like, this is young, naive Clint, as of, I don't know, like a year ago. I was like, whatever. If I write, the coolest new tool or blog post, of course everyone's going to see it. Answer: they're not, right? So, but what has helped is like, as you're growing, having like other people who are sort of influential or have a large audience, like see your work and think it's really good, and share it. So, for example, I was writing for probably like 9 months or a year, and then gradually Daniel Miesler of Unsupervised Learning came across some of my stuff, and we crossed paths at a couple of conferences, and we sort of had like some quick talks, and eventually we ended up like meeting up for coffee a few times, and he's given me a ton of advice and mentorship about building a newsletter, and really I think now we sort of help each other. But his like mentioning TLDRsec or some of the stuff I write in his newsletter has been very huge for the growth of the newsletter. So I don't know. I feel like maybe I'm meandering a bit, but in
No, it makes
short,
sense.
like basically, like the prereq, like before you do anything else, like don't worry about copywriting or marketing or SEO or anything until what you create is like very good. Like that's like table stakes, like do that first. But then once you have something that's pretty good, gradually just helping it be seen by other people is very powerful, and really just keeping at it. So you said right now you're at like 120 subscribers. Like in another couple of months, it's going to be like 200, 500, 1,000. And then some percentage of those people are going to share it with their friends because they're like, oh man, did you see when Lewis like interviewed this other person? And then yeah, that'll grow over time.
Got it. So I haven't, this is really off topic, but it kind of like, I think you might have some good insight into this. So imagine like someone is working, trying to get their name forward. They're maybe not working on their own content, but they might want to start producing like blog posts or something. Do you think using something like a kind of a guest? So I've been noticing a trend. So let's just use I'll use two scenarios. So there's the Portswigger blog, and there's also the SNCC blog. And I've seen a lot of people write guest posts for those types of things. Would you say like something like that would be a good starting ground for someone if they wanted to start getting their name known in the industry? Because I've been seeing that as a trend. Like definitely like there's like people springing up like doing guest iterations for like many companies, not just those. Those two are just examples.
Yeah, and I think Detectify and a few others do those as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I would say yes, but also I would encourage you to think about like what your goals are. So is your goal to have like one specific thing that you create that like people hear about more broadly? Is your goal to build an audience or build a newsletter or build some sort of subscribership, whether that's YouTube or I don't know, a podcast or something else? So one challenge of like, so I guess the sort of the naive benefit of writing on a already very popular thing is that they have a massive audience. So when you put something there, more people will see it. So like this is great. If you're wanting to also grow like a newsletter, podcast, whatever, like a more personal brand, it's not ideal in that people are not going to like your site or a domain or asset you control. So overall, I would say it's good. If you want to maybe optimize a little bit, you could say write like a very detailed, meaty blog post and put it on your blog, and then create sort of like a condensed version of it that has like maybe focuses on one section or is some sort of like a sort of subset of that, and then maybe shop that around to I don't know, Security Weekly, Tech Beacon, or one of these other blogs maybe. Or if you just submit the full thing to this other, say Portswigger, Detectify, SNCC, whoever, then maybe like have their thing link back to your assets, which you control. And then ideally,
sense.
yeah, so I would do that personally. So
Yeah.
also so a couple of people have like Mark Manning, Scott Piper, and a number of others are in flight for guest posting on TLDRsec, and I have them like as the author, and I linked all their social media and stuff like that. So I'm TLDRsec, I think, is gradually trying to become a platform for lots of people writing. But if your goal is specifically to become like a creator or have like a big newsletter or podcast or YouTube channel, I would say you also want some assets that you alone control that are ideally not tied to your current job, because you will leave your current job in some amount of time.
That was very off topic for me because because we were talking and it just kind of felt like the natural way to go in. So let's move away from TLDRsec and we'll move into your background. So obviously, you were previously, for a period of time, you were a software security engineer, a consultant, then senior consultant, and then finally a research and technical director. That's a very good career promotional path, which you were at NCC. How did that path look for you? Because I'm sure like there's a lot of people that might feel that they are kind of like, at the lower end of the spectrum. Like let's say like they're a security engineer right now and they may want to be a technical director. How did that like path go for you from beginning to where you ended up?
Yeah, so I guess one thing that I'll give maybe like a handful of pieces of advice. So one is it's important to understand what the success criteria is for your current role and what success looks like for your next role. Like So to give you a concrete example, when you're a security consultant, and I'm sure you know this quite well, the sort of core value to you to your company is like how billable you are, like basically like how well can you deliver on projects. So at NCC, it's like associate security consultant, then security consultant, then senior security consultant, then principal security consultant. So for like the first couple of those, from like associate to security consultant to senior, like basically what you're doing is you're able to be sort of like a standalone individual contributor on projects. Like you can at first help a little bit on projects, then you can be a solid contributor on most projects, to you can lead projects. And also you can go from like, say, just one domain to multiple domains. So rather, you can do just web apps to you can do web apps, mobile, and like network. And then gradually you can take on sort of more ambiguous, more complex projects. So the reason I'm saying that is because I was very motivated. So coming from grad school, I was like, oh, I want to do research. I want to create tools, give talks at conferences. So I was spending a lot of time and effort as a security consultant trying to do research. However, to get to senior security consultant, it was pretty much just like the core criteria is like be a better consultant, like be able to lead projects, take on harder projects, and do like more types of things. So giving 50 Black Hat talks wouldn't necessarily get me from security consultant to senior security consultant. But that changes a little bit. So going from senior security consultant to principal, then it's like, well, not only do we expect you to be more technical, we expect you to also be like mentoring other people, maybe building out new practice lines, giving talks at conferences. So in general, I think what often looks like in many roles, like security engineering, not just security consulting, I think going from like junior to like standard to like senior, that's usually like you're becoming more technical. And then once you get to here, it's like, oh, are you like leading projects? Are you managing people? Are you like doing architecture stuff? So I think at the beginning, focus on like sort of core technical skills, and then you'll have a little more opportunity to branch out once you have a solid base. I've seen that in a couple of different domains.
Got it. Yeah, because that was kind of one of my questions, and I'm going to say it anyway because you might have some other pockets of goodness to share with the stream. So, in terms of consulting, as you just mentioned, one of the key challenges is balancing billability and research. I would like to know how it played out for you. So, that is what you just mentioned, your path, but like, what could you give to other people who want to also be able to do research, but they struggle to find the time inside their job? What could, maybe if you could offer anything from that perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the short answer is it's hard. So whether you're sort of an internal security engineer or a security consultant and you want to do more research, or there's some like ambitious sort of side project that you think is going to be impactful but takes time and it's sort of difficult getting that time, I guess the biggest thing that I took to heart, which was not my insight, it was some advice some friends and mentors gave to me. I think David Nichols and Noah Badome and maybe Brian Solari, but a couple of people said a similar thing to me, which really resonated, is basically like, if you want to have a additional responsibility or role beyond what you have now, it's sort of like risky for the company to give that to you, having no knowledge of whether you're actually able to deliver on that competently. So let's say you want to be someone who's in charge of research or who leads research projects, but you've never really done research before. Like, that's very risky, right, to the company, because you have no evidence that you'll succeed at that. So this is sort of a long way to get to it, but basically, like, what is the role or type of thing you want to do, and prove that you can do that within your current role, and then them giving you that promotion or giving you that title or responsibility is just a formality. And I think that this applies not just with research, but really anything. Like someone who's like, oh, now you're our security architect because you've already been doing that role for 6 months, or like now you are our I don't know, head of this team because de facto you've been acting as the head of this team. So that's like the idea, but concretely, this is how I did it. I was like, okay, well, I want to get more research time, And in order to do that, like that's an investment the company is making in me. Like that is literally money they're not making because I'm like not on billable projects. So I was like, okay, well, I want to have a proven track record of writing blog posts and white papers and tools and giving talks at conferences. In order to, it's sort of like a chicken and egg, right? Like, how do you get the time to do research when you haven't like done the research yet? So basically, the short answer is do it on top of your current job. So this isn't always possible, right? Like maybe you have a family you need to take care of, maybe you have other responsibilities. But if you're sort of young and don't have many responsibilities, which at the time I didn't, I just did more on top of my job. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do all my normal security consulting things. Also, I'm going to do an extra, I don't know, 10 to 20 hours a week trying to do research to then give talks and do other things to then justify me getting during sort of work hours time. So I did certainly have a lot of help because people like sort of saw these efforts and sort of gave me more research time, which I was then able to use to give more talks and write more content and things like that. But really, I think I guess let me try to like condense this down. So you want to do X, prove in your current role you can already do X, and then that'll gradually give you more time and flexibility to do X more in your day job. And then that becomes more like a part of your role. So for me, spend extra time out of work doing research, use that to justify in work time research. Make sure that whenever you get that, you absolutely crush it so that they feel like that was a total steal. Like we gave Clint 1 or 2 weeks of research, he knocked it out of the park. We should do that again, right? So like work to get the opportunity, and when you're given the opportunity, like over deliver, like make sure it's way better than expected, and then that'll justify you doing it more. And so for being a research director, I tried to like mentor and help other people doing research, and I did that for like a couple of months after the former research director left for another company. For another thing, NCC Group has research directors per office. So I was just for San Francisco. I was not nationwide or global. There were other people who did that, just for context. But yeah, so the other person had left. So I sort of tried to just, again, like in my own time, like help a bunch of other people do stuff. And then when they chose the next person, it's like, well, Clint has already been doing this, so it makes sense to have him do this officially because he's already been doing it anyway. So yeah, I'll stop, but that's some thoughts.
That's obviously a lot of food for thought. The only thing that I would see as being very risky there is that if you go and crush it by already pre-existing doing like a bunch of stuff, like let's say like you want to like do some internal research on a particular domain. Let's just say like browser stuff. You do research outside. You then crush that particular research topic. You then do whatever you need to do within the company, and then they expect you to do that again every single time. But because you already spent like let's say 30 hours doing it outside of work and then did it for like a 1-week project, that could also like then set yourself up for potential, not failure per se, but just lower what people might be then disappointed with your deliverables once you start doing it like in a 9-to-5 scenario.
Yeah, that's a good point where it's like, oh yeah, man, you did this, you did like an amazing job here. And it's like, well, yeah, because you gave me 40 hours and I spent like 100 hours, exactly. 60 of which were my personal time. Yeah, that's a great point. And that's still something that happens at NCC Group, and I'm sure everywhere, where to really do a good job with something, it would take, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks, but you're only given 1 or 2. That's always a problem. And I don't know if there's really a solution. But I would say getting at least 1 or 2 weeks of in-office time does take down the burden a bit from like all of your just only personal time. So yeah, I would say it's not obviously like a solution, but I think it helps a little bit at least.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Okay, so let's move into, so you obviously you were at NCC for some time, but then you transitioned from consulting into R2C. And obviously we're going to talk about Semgrep very shortly. Obviously we want to be conscious of time. So you left R2C, you left NCC and joined R2C. What was your motivation for moving and excitement about like being the head of obviously research for a product company?
Yeah, it was It was a hard decision, to be honest, because I had a pretty sweet role at NCC Group. I really liked my work. I had amazing colleagues who I enjoyed working with, very cool projects. Um, I think one of the motivations was, well, one is like when you're a consultant, you always need to be doing billable work. And I didn't dislike billable work, but I felt like it was not, to me, maximally interesting or impactful. I really wanted like a bigger impact on, I don't know, the industry. And there was also just like some tools that I wish I had. Specifically, I was like, well, I'm on these projects and there's some code pattern specific to this code base that's like kind of wonky that like if I see this, it's probably a bug. It's like, oh, is like there a controller missing an annotation? Is there like this one specific API call? If it's called with the argument that looks like this, it's like probably a bug. Um, and just like doing these like code audits and being like frustrated that nothing like that existed. And actually, like a friend of mine from grad school and I like did try starting to build like a lightweight static analysis tool ourselves. It turns out it's so much work. I think you've done some like custom static analysis stuff too, and it's very fun, but it's like so much work. Like it takes a lot of expertise and a lot of engineering time. And I actually kind of stumbled across R2C by accident. They were very small at the time. Not many, almost no one had heard of them. Some people had, but they had actually been focusing more on like academia than like industry. And but I managed to stumble across them through like a mutual friend, and I looked at Semgrep, which was actually sort of like it wasn't a focus of the company. Yuan, one of the program analysis team people, had like made it a little better during the Hack Week project. So it was like still like it only worked on Python, like kind of, and like PHP, like kind of, and like super broken. And like most of the things, if you've seen or used it now, like the things you like weren't there at the time. But I saw in it like this kernel of like, this is the tool I wish I had at NCC. Like sort of like a diamond in the rough sort of thing. I was like, this is going to be great. And yeah, so I think having the opportunity to shape a tool, especially an open source tool that I wish I had, I found very exciting. And I had also never worked at a startup, and I thought, I'm still young. I don't have too many responsibilities. This would be a good point in my career to see if I like doing that. Um, and yeah, just having the opportunity to do a little bit of everything, I thought would be pretty fun too. So yeah, sort of a combination of factors, but it sort of was a very fortuitous accident in some respects.
Nice. So I want to be conscious of your time and obviously the streams. So I would like to, I had a bunch of questions around everything else, but I think let's just dive into Semgrep and talk about Semgrep. So could you just explain to people that might not know what Semgrep is, like what it is, obviously, and like maybe explain a little bit of what static analysis is too, just in case someone is brand new to that field as well. And then we'll dive into like how you might use it. So from a, either a bug bounty perspective, or if you're using it on open source, or if you're like using it for free, for example, how might you utilize it?
Sure. So first part, what is static analysis? So static analysis is basically analyzing source code without running it for various properties. So in this, we'll be talking about security, but it could also be for reliability or correctness or like linting or things like that. Whereas dynamic analysis is like running code and observing it, how it behaves. So for example, if you're testing a web application using Burp Suite, that's dynamic analysis because it's running, or if you're using Intruder or Scanner or something like that, or if you're fuzzing, these are all like running the code. So that's dynamic analysis. Static analysis would be like sort of your traditional tools like Fortify, Checkmarks, CodeQL, or even grep. Basically, yeah, you're running the code or you're not running the code. So Semgrep is an open source lightweight static analysis tool. So it's different from a bunch of open source tools because it has a more powerful engine and supports more languages. And it's different from some of the big box traditional tools in that it's open source and free to use on anything you want. So you want to run it, if you're a security consultant or bug bounty researcher and you want to run it on like proprietary closed source stuff, you can do that for free without talking to us. Do it as much as you want. It's I think AGPL, so like do whatever you want. And I think the key differentiating factor is the language is how you specify what to find is very natural and intuitive. And if you can read, say, Python code, the patterns you write to analyze Python look like Python. So there's not this separate DSL you have to learn that's going to take you like 2 weeks to learn.
Could you explain to some people who might not know what a DSL is as well?
A domain-specific language. So think like a SQL for like, select star from whatever, some table. So like rather than like a separate language that is not the source code you're trying to find, Semgrep patterns are basically source code with a couple of abstractions. And we'll look at this concretely in a second. But yeah, so that's my short description. Is that sufficient?
That's fantastic, yeah. I liked that you also used the demonstration between static and dynamic too. Didn't ask that. Great. So let's jump into.
Here, I'll share my screen.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Oh, yeah, that'll be a later demo. So again, Semgrep is open source. It's on GitHub. You can check it out here. There's a bunch of built-in security checks. I think maybe 12 to 1400 now, which you can find in this Semgrep rules repo. But yeah, we're just going to sort of dive in. So this is semgrep.dev. This is the main landing page. So it has some information about it. It works on a bunch of languages. There's a bunch of community rules, blah, blah, blah. One thing that I wanted to call out is this sort of recent thing we built called the Embedder. So this is actually a mini Semgrep widget. So this, so Semgrep rules are YAML with sort of keys that say, like find this pattern. This is like the name of the rule. This is Python. Here's like the message to show to users and so forth. So actually you can run this pattern and it'll flag like this code. So anyway, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we're going to do more, like use the official playground, but coming soon will be sort of a little Semgrep widget that if you write a blog post of like, hey, if you're doing code review of, say, I don't know, Flask, here's what to look for, and here's like a Semgrep rule to find it, you'll actually be able to embed Semgrep on your webpage, which would be pretty cool. So if you want to know, like, hey, if I just install Semgrep using Homebrew or Docker or pip, what can I run? So if you go to rules, there's a bunch of security checks that come out of the box. So if you're looking for OWASP top 10 or something that's sort of fast and high signal that you want to run NCI, or if you want some additional security checks. This isn't really the focus of this stream, but one thing we're really leaning into is like, not just how do you find all the bugs, but how do you prevent classes of vulnerabilities from happening in the first place? So for example, we looked at a bunch of popular languages and frameworks and tried to examine how can you disable output encoding, or how can you make things insecure? And then we wrote rules targeting like, this is how you disable output encoding in Jinja templates, for example. And we basically wrote rules like such that if this doesn't flag anything in your code, you're pretty confident that there's no XSS possible. And similarly for communicating over HTTP or not verifying certificates, stuff like that. Or like language specific stuff. We also have some things for like Docker Compose, Docker, Kubernetes, infrastructure as code, Terraform, stuff like that. We've also ported the security rules from a number of other tools. So if you're like, oh, I want to run like, say, Node.js scan, you can actually do that via Semgrep. And I guess one thing that you'll see, so we recently added support for Git Lab. So if you have Git Lab and you want to integrate Semgrep easily into CI, you can do that very easily. Another thing that's pretty cool is, so GitLab SAST, their static analysis offering, wraps a bunch of open source tools. And they've recently started ripping out those tools and replacing them with equivalent Semgrep rules. The reason being Semgrep rules are easier to write and it's faster and more expressive. So as of the 14.0 long-term release, released I think yesterday, basically everyone running GitLab SAST is also running Semgrep. And I think GitLab has about 30% market share of code hosting platforms. So of like, I guess 30% of people using various code hosting things like GitLab or GitHub, those people are actually running Semgrep as of this week. So that's pretty cool too.
It's actually it's pretty exciting to be honest from a business perspective, right? Having GitLab obviously honor and understand that Semgrep is pretty cool and trying to incorporate it and utilize it. I liked could you go back to the rules and kind of show what like the ESLint one looks like? Because obviously as a JavaScript enthusiast, I have spent a long time like utilizing those ESLint plugins and extending them. Could we kind of like see like that? So you basically took each one and started to interact.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll go through like the rule writing process in a second. But so this is the rule ID. We'll run this on JavaScript or TypeScript. We detected a non-literal call to exec. So one nice thing about Semgrep rules is there's this metadata key that you can basically pass arbitrary things into there. So like category, CWE, OWASP, like whatever. And then, yeah, so basically we're saying, hey, the pattern that we're looking for is one of the following. So exec sync, spawn sync. And what we're doing here is the quotes and then ... inside is shorthand for like, this is a string literal. So, we're making sure that the first argument is not a hard-coded string because an attacker could have no control over that.
The interesting thing around this is obviously sometimes you want to not report things as a vulnerability if it's in like a hard-coded string. So, string literal just means that it's in either, double quotes or single quotations, depending on, how you include it.
Yeah. So basically it's like, is a dangerous method being called? And then is that first argument like not a string literal? That is it a variable? And there's a couple of things we're building soon that'll make that easier to express. But that sort of at a high level is the idea.
Got it.
So if you like run this directly from the registry, we can see so the first thing is not, it's there's some user input in there. It's not just a string literal. Same with this, but this is not flagged because ls, an attacker could have no control over that.
Correct. I like that it has the rule and also test code to show examples, which means like people could then just take that and expand it if they wanted to like look for their own types of vulnerabilities and create their own rules, which is pretty nice.
Yeah. So like good software engineering, we designed Semgrep rules to be easy to unit test. So for example, if you go, and by the way, these rules here are largely defined in this repo. There's also some community rules that are not there. But so say, for example, we go to JavaScript. I don't know, let's go maybe security. Yeah, so basically what you could do is for every rule you write in YAML, you can create a corresponding source code file. And in that file, you can annotate, like, I expect this next line of code to match. I expect this one to match as well. And I expect that this doesn't match. And you can do semgrep -- test, and it'll sort of recursively look through your entire directory. And for every unit test file and rule, it'll run that rule on that file to make sure that you're matching both the lines you expect to and not matching the lines you expect not to. So this is a way that is very nice to document basically like, this is what I expect to match. And I expect this to not be flagged because it's not sort of the intention of this rule.
This is very similar to, well, obviously it's not the same, but it's very similar to like the ESLint stuff too. So you could basically build like the ESLint test runner that would, you would build like corresponding rules to assert that, this would equal to, a flag or a warning, and then this would be flagged too as okay, which is probably going to be a nice crossover if anyone is like moving from something like ESLint to writing rules into moving into something like Semgrep, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, definitely. I think any tool should allow you to specify test cases for like, I expect, Because like I actually have found this a lot with me, like my own rule writing, where I'm like, okay, I have like one case I have in mind, but then I run it on a repo, and I'm like, oh, I expected this thing to match, and it didn't. Why? And then I figure out why, and then I add that as a test case to sort of make sure to future proof to myself that like I don't break it in the future, or that I handle all the cases I expect to.
Nice. So I know I took you basically off your trail of thought by just asking you a bunch of questions, but like let's jump into like how you might utilize this from either the CLI perspective or from a web perspective, because sometimes there are playgrounds that you can use, or
yeah, so let's here, hold on a second. When I was restarting my computer, it
moved everything.
Removed a few things. Yeah, so let's just do like a very quick example. So I'm going to give you the Semgrep rule writing 101 in like 5 minutes. And so this is the Semgrep playground. So if you want like a nice web UI and you don't want to install anything, you can try writing rules here. You can also run it locally via CLI, and we'll do that in a second. But so basically here, we can select like what language are we using. We can name this if we want to like send it to other people. You can write the pattern you want to find here, and then this is the test code. And then matches show up here on the right-hand side. So let's say, for example, we want to find all calls to exec. So we've got a couple of test cases here. So we can just copy some code into here. So if we run with this, this will find call to exec where the argument is exactly ls, but here we probably want any arguments. So Semgrep rules are basically like the language you're targeting with I think 2 helpful abstractions. So one is the ellipsis operator, or dot 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 dot, which is basically you can think of it like dot star in regular expressions, where you're like, I don't care what this is. This can be 0 or more things. So what we're saying here is find all calls to exec, where exec is a function being called, and it has a 0 or more arguments. So if we run this,
not to be, if you're a JavaScript nerd, not to be confused with the spread operator. Please continue.
Correct. Yeah. So making a syntax that works in every language, even when there's like similar things, that's like a separate can of worms.
Yes, indeed.
But yeah, so here we're matching this exec as well as this one. So note that here this function is some exec, not exec. So we're not flagging that, even though something like grep probably would. This white space here is fine. This white space here, like no problem. And here we're not flagging this because it's a comment, and Semgrep is aware when something is a comment, or here when it's in a string literal. So like, right, if you were to grep for something, this looks exactly like what you would expect, but it's in a string, so it's not actually a function call. And here, this is, I think, demonstrating where Semgrep is even smarter. So here, Semgrep understands that locally, you're importing exec and naming it safe function. So when you call safe function on the next line, this is actually calling exec. So even though our pattern is not aware of imports or aliasing, we're still finding the right thing. Which is cool. And I think philosophically, what we want to do is basically like match the thing the user intends to do without sort of burdening them with all of this sort of accidental complexity.
That's a really important component to making sure that static analysis is actually useful as well, because imagine if you were just reporting on like the import function, like that technically isn't a vulnerability. It's only a vulnerability until it's actually being utilized, right? So like obviously you could import code, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be ran until that function call is actually written explicitly with inside code, which is obviously, it would annoy developers, and it would definitely annoy developers if you got to the point where it would be very sad for developers to basically always have to argue this isn't an issue because the code has not been used, and that's technically an argument with the vulnerable dependencies too, but we won't go into that right now. But yeah, that's a very big different topic, and maybe I should bring someone else on to talk about that. But
Yeah. We could talk about that perhaps another time. I do have a
Yeah.
bunch of thoughts on that,
Yeah.
but
Not
for
today.
time,
Not
I
today.
think I will I will not.
Yeah.
So just to highlight, like this could be 0 or more arguments. So yeah, we're matching this, or it can be in conditionals or function calls or whatever. Okay, so one abstraction, the ellipsis operator. The next abstraction I want to tell you about is metavariables, which you can think of as like capture groups in regular expressions. It's basically like, I don't know what this is, but I want to capture a reference to it. So and a metavariable is just one thing, so it's not more than one thing. So if we run this, and also,
Gotta change the message too.
yeah, it copied it in from like another thing. We can actually interpolate any metavariable in this thing that we're matching here.
Nice.
So if we do that, yeah, so note that this X is getting matched to user input because it's here. And note that we're not matching these two because, again, using just one metavariable is saying exec is being called with just one argument. So it's not matching this, but it is matching these. So within one pattern, metavariables are always enforced to be the same. So if you're like, well, I'll show you an example in a second of using this. But so basically, two abstractions. You're to match Python code, you're writing basically Python code patterns. And when there's something that you don't care about, you can use the ellipsis operator. When there's something that you want to sort of grab a reference to, or you want just one thing, you can do the metavariable. You can also combine them. Like say, for example, you wanted to do calls to exec with one or more arguments. You could do something like this. So this should match, I think, probably all of them except this with no arguments. So here, X is getting bound to A because that's the first argument, and it's doing that again, and so forth.
Well, that's interesting. So you can, if you use the dot dot dot, it basically will match one or more arguments that are included.
Yeah. Or if we were to say reverse the order here, then X is going to match the last argument.
I see. Got it. Interesting.
So here now we're matching D or C, and so forth.
Very cool.
Yeah. So that's like the basics. So that's like within one pattern, but you can combine patterns. So sometimes you might want to say this or this and that, or this but not that. So here's like a very simple way to say, like, I want to find any call to exec such that, so you can click this plus to add another clause. So let's say any call to exec, as long as this first argument is not a string literal. So we want the first argument to be like a variable, or like a interpolation of strings, or something that's not just like a string literal. So with that, we can see we are not flagging this, but I think the rest of them are. Oh, I guess we probably don't want to flag this first one, so we could just change it to that, probably. So exec calls with at least one argument such that the first argument is not a string literal.
I can see this getting like very useful to being able to build like very like specific queries, and like not specifically complex, but you want to basically only find like a particular variant that has like this of this, and this would probably also be useful. And this is for like when you bring in like new frameworks or like new templates. Obviously, it's not always it can be like reviewed as such, but like let's say that there's a new dangerous feature that you're seeing in Python which hasn't had a rule written for it yet, and you know that if it goes into the first argument or like of the third argument, for example, and it's not a string literal, then you could basically write a rule in Semgrep to find all of those variants across all your code bases, which would be quite interesting from a ensuring that your code is safe from that particular ability.
Yeah, actually, a friend of mine recently, they had a bug bounty submission where the person found a interesting auth bypass,
Hmm.
sort of like a P1, like pretty serious type issue, and he tracked it down to the part of the code that was responsible, saw what the pattern was, and then in about an hour or so, cranked out a Semgrep rule that was basically finding all variants of that, and he ran it and found a P0 that the bug bounty person had not reported, but was basically the same pattern as what he had just seen. So he was able to say, okay, this is something that's bad. In general, what does this look like? And then find other instances of it across his code base. Again, so I think the key value here is like time to iteration, right? He was
Yeah.
like, oh, I just saw a new thing. I created a check for it in like an hour. Um, and that's like including figuring out like what it should look like. So I think that sort of like philosophically, one thing that we're trying to do is like when you have an idea in your head of source code you want to find, how can we make that as easy and fast as possible? So how can we make the tool fast in finding it? How can we make the language expressive but simple? And that's sort of the goal.
Got it. That's very, very cool, to be honest. Like, there's not that many tools that can easily do that against a large code base in, like, let's say an hour. Sometimes you have to build the code. Sometimes they can't scan the templates properly. Sometimes they can't capture all the, the particular templates and being able to translate that into their own kind of language to be reviewed. So that's a very it's a very powerful response.
Yeah, thank you. And it's one thing I like about it. So as a pen tester, like often I didn't get buildable source code. This runs on source code, so like partial source code is fine. And again, like oftentimes that's like proprietary closed source code that I couldn't use typical commercial tools because like licensing wouldn't work. I didn't have like 150 grand to spend as like a single pen tester.
Yep.
And yeah, like I've written custom rules in most static analysis tools. It's possible in most tools. It just takes a fair amount of upfront work. So we're trying to make that as easy as possible.
Got it.
Let's see. Let's see. So I have a couple of quick examples. I don't know. How long do you want to take?
I'm good. My plan is to, and I'm sure people would enjoy this too. I'm going to split the stream up into two sections: the starting interview and also the Semgrep demo. So feel free to continue as long as you wish.
Cool. Yeah, I'll make it pretty quick. So here's an example of how to use meta variables to track user input or to track the flow of information. And we're adding in like an official taint mode soon, but you can also do that given sort of the primitives you have now. So
could you also before that just explain what a taint is, because the people might interpret that as a naughty word rather than the defined definition of the security aspect of it.
Yeah, security is naughty. So yeah, so in static analysis in general, there's and really in security testing, there's this sort of like concept of like where does user input come in, and then where is it dangerous for it to head. And if you think about it, like in OWASP top 10, like injection, like a lot of security vulnerabilities can be reduced to simply the idea that attacker input goes somewhere dangerous, right? So for example, SQL injection, a say URL parameter eventually goes to an unparameterized SQL query, or XSS user input goes to somewhere that's not output encoded. So that idea is described in static analysis using a couple of common terms. So user input is called a source. The dangerous part that it goes to is called a sink. And when a variable gets information from something that is considered untrusted, it's called tainted. Like for example, in this case, so this is an Express app, and we're defining a route for /foo. We are getting a query parameter name and storing it into this variable named resp. So at this point, resp is tainted because it contains user-controlled data, which is potentially malicious. So we don't want that to go directly to res.write without some sort of output encoding, because then that could lead to cross-site scripting. So yeah, source, sink, And when a variable has user control data, it's tainted. And taint mode in a static analysis tool is basically you can define how that flow should work. Yeah.
Good explanation. Very good explanation. Yep. I like to always talk about it, the crossover between when a source, like such as request.query or request.body, meets async, such as request.write. So like you have those two things. They're both safe to begin with. It only becomes vulnerable when a source becomes tainted and enters that sync. That's how I like to define it normally. But
definitely, yeah, that's good. I like that. Okay, so let's show how we can like quickly map this to a Semgrep rule. So okay, so here's something that we would like to find. Let's just like directly copy this into the Semgrep pattern. So first, start from source code, and let's just abstract away the things that we don't care about. So for example, this route could be anything like the path. So let's just use the ellipsis operator. We don't know exactly what this variable is going to be called.
It can technically be called anything.
It can be called anything. Yeah. So like, let's just do that. And let's see. So that's used again here.
Would this also work if you were building like normally in JavaScript applications and Express specifically, like middleware would be classed as like having the next operator inside the function? Could you also like include something like that in this type of query just by including an additional argument? Or would that kind of break the current context?
Yeah, like an additional one here.
Yeah, so like a second function operator. Sorry, a third function operator. So you have request response next, and that's sometimes middleware that sits in the front. So you could either have it two or more, basically, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so we could either, if we know it's just one more, we could grab that. Or if it could be 0 or more, we could just do that.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay.
And then basically, so we don't know what this, so some like user variable is getting accessed. It's getting stored into some variable. And then eventually that variable ends up getting to here. So
I have a question. I know, sorry, I'm interrupting you. So like you currently have var. Could this be constant let as well in some scenarios? Could this be anything, or does it have to be a definition of var let const? Let's say if it was in JavaScript.
Yeah. Let's just try.
Okay.
So one thing I like about the fast iteration speed is if you don't know, like just try.
Okay.
Like, just see what happens. So to be honest, the answer is I don't know. So let's just find out. Like that.
Yeah, so you can have const or you can have let. Basically, it's just like const means you can't change the value. Let means obviously you can. And var is the old hat way of doing things in most apps.
Cool. Yeah, so basically, Semgrep, the engine, has this concept of equivalences, where an equivalence is basically like these two things are semantically the same, and we basically add those to do like what the user means. So here, for JavaScript and I think TypeScript specifically, we have some equivalences between like let, var, and const, where I think I forget. I think one of them is like more general. So I think like var matches all of them, but I think const is maybe more specific.
Yeah.
But let's see what happens. Yeah. So it's like if you really wanted to only find consts, you can do that. But if you want to be more generic and find like any of those three, you can use var.
I did notice in some of your previous examples that like a generic template string would also be found. So like let's say like a template string which can have arguments inside. That was found via just including like variables and stuff. So it looks like the engine itself is quite smart to be able to pick up, this type of stuff, which is obviously very powerful and important when people are writing fast rules, because you don't want them to like have to try and implement their own stuff, right? Sometimes.
Yeah, like ideally, like sometimes you do need to add a bunch of cases for types of things, but ideally we don't want to have you need to think of like what is every possible way this can happen. There are certainly some things you need to do, but ideally we're trying to minimize that a little bit.
Got it. Okay.
So let's say there was like another statement that we added in here. So notice how this doesn't match now, because we're assuming that these are basically like the only statements in this method. So realistically, probably what we would want to do is something like this. Oh, sorry. What I meant to do was that, yeah.
So yeah, I have a question around this. Like, how does this handle things like white space and other stuff? Like, so, like, imagine like this was like not in the same kind of space definition. Like, if it was like at the beginning, and like someone just didn't have very good code comment or like code indentation, would that also be, you know, something that would be fine in this scenario? Yeah. Okay. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, so in Python, this would break because that's not valid Python, like indentation matters. But in places where indentation doesn't matter, Semgrep doesn't care.
Got it. Very, very cool. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't got that one before. But yeah, so I would say in general, Semgrep doesn't care about white space and sort of ignores comments for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, I like that the way that you can write the rules is basically just taking a snippet of code and extending it. And that's not what I've really seen in most tools. Like, this is like, you know, people already know this code. They know how it works. They know what arguments normally go into these functions. They know if it's going to be if it's going to be a literal string, it's not a problem. If it's going to be a variable or a template string or something of that nature, it could be quite bad. So yeah, I really like the way that this is written out.
Nice, cool. Yeah, I'm glad. So let's look at one final example.
Mm-hmm.
So notice that we're not flagging this because like this variable is used, but it's like a concatenated, right?
Got it. Mm-hmm,
so here we're assuming it's like just this. So there's another helpful operator. I don't know what it's called, but it's, I don't know, interpolation operator or something. But basically what we're saying here is like there is some expression being passed to res.write, and somewhere in that is this variable. Like it could be anything, like I don't care. But like if this variable is somewhere in there as an argument, like maybe it's like a string.format, like whatever. So this could also be, I don't know, like other stuff, like whatever. Basically, this variable somehow is in this expression.
Would that be the same thing? Like, let's say like you are taking in request.userInput, but like let's say like you're appending like an ID to that value as well. Like let's just say like a hard coded value, and you were appending that into that assigned variable. Would that be a similar thing that you would just write in the, you know, assigned variable too? But let's say like you just did like, you know, ID. Yeah, just leave it blank. It's like ID.
Yeah. So currently, I'm guessing this is not going to, because we're assuming it's just this.
Yeah.
But if we wanted to change it to do something like, I think that should probably work, or we can just use the yeah. Let's try this.
So it contains this value, and it could contain other stuff.
Yeah, there we go.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, I mean that's absolute, because like obviously, you know, there's a lot of scenarios where, you know, for things like server-side request forgery, for, you know, cross-site scripting, there's always going to be potential, like not just user input defined by itself. It's also going to be, you know, potentially concatenated with other data. You know, like, you know, not found user blah, for example. That would be like a very common thing in a res.write or a, you know, response value return back to the client kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's intended to make it so like this kind of is somewhere in there, but I don't know where. So like, just do what I mean, sort of thing.
Nice.
Cool. So I have one more playground example, and then I have some local CLI, two quick local CLI examples,
Great.
if you want.
I have more than enough time for you. Don't worry. So.
Cool. Well, yeah, we'll just hang out. Okay, so this is a Go code example. So far we've looked at Python. We just looked at JavaScript. This is Golang. So again, you're learning how to use one tool and you're applying it everywhere. So most companies are very polyglot. So like, why use 50 tools when like one tool you just learn once and everyone can use? So basically, let's say we want to look for two things. One is people creating a TLS config with SSL v3. Like this is an old Cypher suite we don't want. And another setting you can use is setting this insecure skip verify to true. So that means we are not verifying that the certificate verification is working properly. So if either of those is the case, it's a problem. So here in this example, we can see we're using an old cipher. So this is bad. Here we can see insecure skip verify is set to true. So this is bad. And here, let's say we're like, this is OK, and they're not setting this true. So like this one's fine. So we want to flag these first two. So again, like what does the process look like? We can just take this code, copy it up here. And so a bunch of this we don't care about, right? So this keylog writer, like whatever, like, I don't care. So we can just use the ellipsis operator to say there could be 0 or more things here. So min version, we do care about this. So let's keep that in there.
And then for this rule, does it need to all be on the same line, or can it just be like, obviously indented out as well?
Yeah, that doesn't matter. You can just.
Gotcha. Yeah, you can do it however you want. I was just curious.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, I was just yeah. So basically, what we're saying is like a TLS. Oh.
There's an ampersand right now.
I don't think that should matter. Let's see.
We have a comment from the stream where it says the biggest advantage of the easy syntax is it looks like the code and devs can pick it up quickly and write their own rules, which I think kind of is what we kind of were commenting on earlier. Like if it's written in their code, technically a security consultant doesn't have to write these rules. It can be a partnership between security and development, and obviously that's where we're trying to push anyway in this field, is that we want to enable the developers to be able to move fast. We don't want to get in their way, and a few ways to do that is by enabling them to do X, Y, and Z through the power of rule writing, or they say, hey, this was vulnerable, could you write a rule to work with this? And I know there's been a few like Facebook presentations that I've seen when I down over in San Jose. And they basically talk about like how they work with engineering to write their own custom rules. Obviously not with Semgrep, with their own proprietary scanner, but like it's the same principle really, and it's obviously very powerful to be able to work with developers that way.
Yeah, this is a great point. I totally agree. So actually, interestingly, Semgrep is originally from Facebook, actually. So so the creator, so Yoan Padalu, he was the first program analysis hire at Facebook, and he built what was at the time called Semgrep, which was a lightweight way to find interesting code patterns. And they used it internally to enforce like hundreds or like 1,000 of secure coding standards within Facebook. So it was called Semgrep at the time. He ended up leaving after a few years, and R2C ended up hiring him. And they were building like a stuff, but then during a hack week, he decided to pick up Semgrep again and make it better. And they were like, oh man, like this is amazing. We should do this more. And then after a little bit more time, it got rebranded Semgrep. So yeah, so Semgrep was originally called Semgrep, which was originally a Facebook project.
Wow.
And actually, if you go Facebook, I think, yeah, so it was originally called Poof. But if you go, yeah, so basically it started here as a syntactical grep, and there was also like syntactic patch and like other stuff. So yeah, this the Semgrep is the brainchild of Yoan, who also worked on Coccinelle when he was a PhD student, which was basically a tool to do large-scale refactorings of the Linux kernel. So it did like tons and tons of bug patches there. He then goes to Facebook, builds Semgrep, then goes to R2C, and then now we're building Semgrep, basically his sort of prior project, but we're like making it a bigger, better thing. But definitely, it's sort of originally his brainchild.
I do love this. I actually I didn't know the history behind it, and that's actually really fascinating to learn about.
Yeah. So we, I think, are publishing a blog post soon about sort of the history of Semgrep on the blog. So keep an eye out for that. It's pretty interesting to look at sort of the historical context. And yeah, to address what someone said in the stream. Yeah, so I do think the ease of use is a key thing. And we do want to build, historically static analysis has been confined to like academia or like security teams. And I think ultimately to like really scale security, to really like make a difference, I think that we need engineering and security teams to work closely together. And that means we need to build security tools that are nice and usable for them. And we've actually given presentations to a couple of security teams at different companies. And they've said like, oh man, this is great. Can you present to like our developer productivity team? Can you present to like our infrastructure engineering team? Because they are also like, they have coding standards. They have like, when they have new developers, they need to teach them like, oh, use this API instead of this API, or if you're calling this thing, make sure you call this other thing, or else it's going to be a bug. Like software has assumptions about how it should and shouldn't work. Sometimes those are security related, sometimes not. But basically what we're trying to build is like the easiest, fastest, best way to find code. And security is only one application of that. So I think that like if you're an engineering team, our hope is that if you find a bug, you should be able to write a Semgrep rule for it and roll it out to CI and like never have that happen again. And actually, like I'm not going to talk about it in detail, but I'm just going to like point you to this so that you can maybe read it later. But so this is a blog post from a developer, like our engineering manager at R2C. And basically what happened is like they were writing some code and they found like, hey, we're accidentally leaking some sensitive information the way we're calling sort of the SQL Alchemy's logger. And basically they were like, okay, what does this look like? What is the solution? Like, what does good look like? And then he basically wrote wrote a Semgrep query again with some unit tests to so basically, oh, let's use this obfuscated string type instead. Like use it here, and then wrote like a custom Semgrep check to basically make sure that this doesn't happen again. So it's like engineer finds a bug, writes, fixes it, and then writes a rule to make sure it doesn't happen again. And this whole process actually only took a few hours from like finding the bug to deciding what the fix should be, to creating the Semgrep rule, to rolling it out in CI. And at R2C, we actually do this all the time, where and not just for security. Like the engineering team is like, oh, like we this is some like stylistic or like some quality thing that we keep doing. Let's just write a Semgrep rule to like make sure we don't do this again. So like, yes, our AppSec team does write rules, but our engineering team actually writes a bunch of rules for that are specific to our code base. And we find in practice, those tends to be some of the highest signal because they're tailored and customized to your environment. So unlike sort of a generic check, which depending on how you write code, maybe higher or less signal, but when it's like written with the full knowledge of how your code works, it tends to be like very precise and very high signal in practice. Because you know what your code looks like, right?
Yeah, I love that. That's actually really cool. The only thing which obviously pointed out to me with my security hat on, I was like, oh, they support regex. Hopefully they make sure they don't prevent like catastrophic, the kind of RDoS thing through the rules scanning. I was like, oh, but yeah, no, that's actually really awesome.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so it's actually really cool though, because obviously if you can obviously enable like regex, you know the types of things that are going to go into your code base. You know that usually what's going to be secret, like what API keys are normally going to be there, what the length of those keys, etc. So like sometimes this is very powerful to make sure that things are obfuscated in the correct way. And I love that obviously it needs to be, really realistically, like to write these types of rules, you have to have kind of very intimate knowledge of the code base to be able to like prevent this stuff from happening. Yeah, that's awesome. I will definitely put that as an example in the YouTube video when we put it online tomorrow.
Nice. Yeah, please do. Yeah, and actually, so we were getting a pen test recently, and some of the like automated requests that Burp was sending were causing some like invalid JSON errors on our side. So we're like, oh, let's create a wrapper which will automatically like ensure that we're like conforming that like, oh, this is valid JSON before like getting to the rest of the logic. And then so we're like, okay, what does this good thing look like? let's create a wrapper that does it the right way. Let's ensure that we're calling this wrapper instead of the original way, and then let's roll that out everywhere. And let's create a Semgrep rule and then roll that out in CI. So again, like one of our engineers did that after seeing too many noisy alerts from like PagerDuty or something, and was like, oh, this is annoying. I'm just going to like fix it everywhere and then make sure we don't do it this way again. And again, that was like an hour or two.
Nice. Definitely,
So,
if anyone's getting anything on PagerDuty, like they're probably going to write a rule as quick as possible to never see that again, so they can enjoy their weekend.
yeah, it might have been Datadog, not PagerDuty, so like slightly less annoying, but still we have like a Slack channel that shows like 403s are just like weird errors.
Got it.
So yeah, so if you're writing a rule, I'm not going to really talk about this today, but we have. So let's say you're like, okay, Semgrep is cool. I want to roll it out across a lot of repos. We have configs. So if you go to our docs and click CI, there's basically information about like how to use this in GitHub Actions or Git Lab or other CI providers. And usually it's just like a couple lines of config. You just put whatever. So Semgrep runs in your CI system. You never send your code to us. So if you're using like Travis or Circle CI or GitHub Actions, like your code stays there, and we just like scan as a sort of Docker image within that, and then only send. So you if you want like MR comments and integrations and like trends and metrics and findings over time, we've built a dashboard that like collects all the information and lets you like set things up nicely. Basically, a bunch of companies were rolling out Semgrep, and they were all building the same thing. So we built that thing that they were building so that like everyone didn't build the same thing, because like why? So this isn't open source, but there is a free community tier that can do most of the things for free, and a bunch of companies are using it across many repos for free. You don't need to talk to a salesperson; you can just use it. But yeah, so if you click on dashboard, here I'll go to our return to corp. So again, I'm going to talk about this for like 2 seconds because it's not really the point right now. But if you're like, oh, this is nice, I would like to see it across all of my repos. If you go to this overview page, you can see like, oh, like how much are people fixing things, what's open, what's fixed, how are things changing over time. You can look at like specific projects, what's been fixed. So a project basically corresponds to a GitHub repo. You can have a bunch of policies, which are basically like, for a repo, what security checks do I want to run? So you might say like, oh, all of our prod applications, we want to run these things and this thing and this thing, where all of our Flask repos, we want to run this, and all of our Node.js or Node apps run this. And basically for a policy, you have a bunch of rules. You can say, like, do I want PR comments? Like maybe first you want to just audit, like, scan all my pull requests, but just tell me, the security team, about it, because I'm not confident enough yet to show developers directly. So you can do that. You can like email yourself or send to a specific Slack channel. You can send it to like a webhook. So like if you have some other system where you collect things, you can choose whether to block the build or not. So basically, like all of these tweaks are things that, again, companies were building themselves. So like, let's make this easy. And also one thing that we found, and if you used Brakeman or any other static analysis tool and you've written some custom rules for it, what you might find is that like if you have 50 to 100 repos and you have like a custom rule and you want to roll that out everywhere, like it's kind of a pain, right? Because you need to like put that in every repo, or you need to have like a centralized repo that you then sort of include as like a submodule, or you have to like bump that version every time you update the rule. And it's kind of just like a logistical pain. But here, what this allows you to do is like the security team can say, these are the rules to run where, and you can asynchronously update that at any time without relying on the development team to like approve your pull request, or you don't have to fire like 50 pull requests to update 50 repos. You just change one thing, one place, one time, whenever you want, out of band with the SDLC, and you're just immediately starting to get that coverage everywhere. So like, let's say, for example, we wanted to like start checking for this rule. We could just like save it as, I don't know, like TLS. And then all you have to do is click add to policy, and then like click one of the policies you already have. And then instantly every project with that policy, the next PR, it's going to start scanning with this rule that you just wrote. So for example, like for us, when we found some bugs in our code, we were like, oh, this is a thing we don't want to happen. Write a rule, add to policy, and then like instantly, like all of our repos are getting checked for that. So you can imagine in say like 100 or 1,000 repos, like this saves you a lot of time. So that's basically all I want to say about this. Like again, it's not like the point of this.
Yep.
There you can slice and dice, find like whatever. Like basically like business problems of running static analysis at scale is what we're trying to solve there. But everything else here you can use for free, and everything except that basically is open source. But that's also free if you want to.
Yeah, so you still can utilize that piece of software at the free tier, right? At the community tier. So technically, if you were like a open source developer, or if you were, a small company, I'm not entirely sure of the context, but like if you were at least open source developer, you could definitely, or maybe even bug bounty if you wanted to see trends, I guess. But open source developer at least would be able to, add their repositories there and see the metrics and see fixes over time, etc. When people were when they were introduced, etc. It'd be very useful to have that kind of content.
Yeah, and you don't actually need to just be open source or a small team. Like we have medium and big companies using the free tier.
Oh,
like,
there you go.
That's fine. Yeah, honestly, I don't remember offhand what the barrier is. I think like the going from sort of the free tier to the paid tier is like better access control, longer data retention, SSO, and like a couple of advanced features. But like honestly, for most companies, I think until you're like really serious and doing like complicated things, like 80% of your use case, probably the community tier is fine, would be my guess.
Awesome. Okay.
So I don't know. We have a number of companies that are not small using the community tier across many repos, and like that's fine.
Got it. Okay. Awesome.
Okay, so let's finish this example super quick, and then we can do some CLI examples if you want, because I feel like the fast iteration flow doing like more of a security like code auditor, like security consultant perspective is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I'm down.
Okay, cool. So again, just to finish this, so we also want to find when insecure skip verify is true. So basically, we're just going to copy this guy into this, and basically what we're saying here is like find any TLS config struct being created such that the min version is this, or insecure skip verify is true. So either of these can be the case. So that's what this or is means. So it doesn't have to have both. Either one of them is a problem. So we can see here we're flagging both of these, but not this, because neither of those cases match. And if you sort of look at what the YAML looks like, you can see here there's like a pattern either clause, and under that there can be arbitrary other things that are saying like, find this, or there could be 10 of these, whatever. So I'm not going to talk. So Semgrep can actually do a ton of things we're not going to talk about today. But if you do want to see like everything that it can do, go to the docs. And then I would say these two are probably the most important for like what you can do with the rule. So pattern syntax, basically within one pattern, these are all the things you can do. And then if you go to rule syntax, it's like these are basically all the tools in your tool belt. These are the different clauses you can use. So there's a lot of things you can do here, which we're not going to talk about today, but like feel free to read those. Oh, there's also a Semgrep tutorial. So if you go to semgrep.dev/learn, there's basically a bunch of like specific tailored examples that are like, okay, this is how you use this. This is how you use that. So feel free to check that out as well.
Super awesome. Yeah, you should definitely check out the Semgrep tutorial. Why don't we jump over to CLI, cool. And we'll take a look at how
that. Cool. Yeah. So I basically cloned the Netflix conductor repo and I added some like auth-z annotations to make like a cooler demo. But so let's say we get a new repo. We're auditing it. We like don't know what's inside it. So one thing we might want to know is like, what are all the URLs referenced? Like that's kind of interesting. So let's say using like ripgrep or something, we were like, okay, well, I don't know, like show me like all the URLs. But the thing is, like, there's like a lot of stuff in comments, right? Like this doesn't matter. This is potentially interesting, but like comment, tons of comments. So it would be nice to have like a source code aware grep that we can easily iterate on. So that's actually what Semgrep is going to provide for us here. So here's an example rule I created. It's very simple. It's just like, okay, let's find some HTTP string literals. Here, let's just start off by like grabbing any hard-coded string in this repo. So, oh, and this is only going to run on Java files because we've specified the language here. So let's say, oh, so also let's just see like what are we sort of looking at here? So, okay, so like 600 of those. If we go to this, like 2,300. So there's like a lot of things to look through, and I don't know about you, but I'm like, I don't really want to look through that many things. So
realistically, I would like to see the only things I need to look at rather than have to sort through everything through grep and so on.
Yeah, totally. So again, the goal here is like, so previously we were like, we know exactly what we want to look for, and let's find that. Now we're kind of doing a little bit of exploration. We're like, okay, well, like let me just sort of like see what's in here. So this is taking a little bit of time because so basically what we just did is we wrote a source code aware strings, like strings for some, I don't know, like food like a binary file that's like pulling out all the ASCII stuff. What we just did in this pattern in basically like one line of code is show me all of the string literals in any Java file in this repo in like 20 seconds. So this often tells you interesting things about a code base. I don't know about you, Lewis, but when I'm auditing repos, oftentimes like strings are interesting.
Normally, they normally give quite a good example of like either what type of like sometimes like these things can contain like obviously paths. They can contain secrets. They can contain like hard-coded value, like as you can see like the database connection stuff, and like those sometimes are quite interesting to look at and so on. So yeah, it's like the strings are always, especially like when you're like reviewing something you don't really understand yet or you don't really know, normally like looking like either doing a dump of the strings is a good indication of where to start looking, or like what type of things you might be in store for essentially.
Yeah, totally. So here it's like, yeah, they're using like JDBC and MySQL, talking to localhost. Like normally you'd be like, oh, like this is scary, but then probably, yeah, it's like in a test harness file. So, okay, so let's say we wanted to like zoom in a little bit on say like HTTP URLs, because obviously everything should be HTTPS by default. So it would be nice to say like, show me all of the URLs that are not that. So there's also a syntax that basically allows you to provide a regular expression here to say find a string literal that looks like this.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see what that gets us. So again, we like had an initial idea. We wrote like an initial rule, started skimming it, tweaked the rule a little bit, and like, okay, let's see what we find now. Okay, so we're like finding some URLs or like HTTP just like in a string. But like, also some stuff that maybe we don't care about. This is another thing that I often do. I'm like, okay, well, here's like some things that some files we probably don't care about.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be nice to like ignore things. So if you go to the Semgrep docs and just do like excluding a rule in paths. So basically you can say either on the command line, you can pass like a -- exclude if you want to, or if like for a specific rule, you want to exclude certain things, you can do that. So yeah, let's like start making this a little bit higher signal. So maybe we want to actually confirm that it's like a full URL and not just like a partial thing. And let's maybe add this. So one thing I will say about YAML getting the indentation right is terrible. So let's see. So that's like source test. That sounds like something we probably want to exclude. see how that goes. So okay, so we've updated the rule. So now we're looking for the full http:// and excluding at least one directory. And again, so like we just scanned the entire repo in like a second or two. So we can like iterate pretty quickly here. Okay, so we're seeing like some localhost stuff. Okay. Yeah, so let's say, for example, we were like wanting to make sure that we're not like connecting to external things over HTTP. So we might want to filter out calls to localhost. So we could do that doing something like this. We can say pattern not regex. Basically, we're going to specify a regex pattern that says like don't match this. So anything that has like localhost in it somewhere, like let's just not worry about that. Yeah, so we scanned 365 files, only found 9 things. Okay, so yeah, these are fine. They're not like full things. Like we could, I guess, improve the regex. But so let's say like, okay, so like Java seems okay, but since this pattern is not specific to Java, we can actually just add a bunch of other languages here. Yeah, that's probably fine for now. So for example, let's say this is like a polyglot repo and you've written a rule that applies to many things. By just like adding a few things to that clause, we're going to start seeing matches on a bunch of other things. Yeah, so this is almost the end of this demo. It's more just like, okay, like I want to like iteratively explore this repo. I don't know exactly what I'm looking for, but just like tweak. So here, so this is interesting. So in JavaScript, we did find a link to not just localhost, but an external URL, which is over HTTP. So in this case, like, I guess in the help. So this would be an example of something you probably would want to improve. Or just like, this is on GitHub, so like, yeah, HTTPS would be fine here. But yeah, so basically we found some HTTP URLs probably that we should fix in like 5-10 minutes, going from 0, basically. And again, we didn't need to look through 2,300 things to find them.
Which is definitely better. So I think obviously the powerful thing here is that you can obviously work locally to build rules that ultimately can be scanned against various code bases. And obviously this is a fairly simple rule. You know, it's just looking for HTTP and obviously ignoring, you know, localhost. And obviously, as you saw the 127001, which technically, you know, that rule could be extended further to also match for that too. And so on. And obviously there would also be the, you know, IPv6, you know, annotation, etc. But ultimately, I think this is obviously a really powerful way to run a tool or, you know, build, like if you're like looking for more esoteric things, I could see this being very useful, or just generic things like trying to do secure defaults, like making sure that your Java repositories are not, you know, let's say like, you know, the trying to load packages from HTTP or something of that nature. Like you could definitely write a rule that may look for something like that as well, which is like super powerful, especially when you're trying to like eradicate those types of problems from your code base.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think your comment made me think of like, I don't know, like also like JDBC or something. Like you could imagine as a security professional, you don't necessarily want, like something might not be a bug, but like you want to know about it. So for example, like whenever someone adds a like JDBC connection string in your code, like you might want to know. And using the Semgrep community dashboard, you could like set a notify only rule to Slack that looks for like newly added strings that look like that. And there are a couple of companies who are basically alerting on new routes or new routes that don't require authentication or something like that, where it's like, hey, this isn't a bug. Like there are legitimate cases where you want a route that is unauthenticated, but you know, you probably want to make sure that that's intentional. So there's a handful of companies doing stuff like that.
That's kind of like responsive, like code reviewing too, right? Because obviously, like, you do have reviewers normally on new pieces of code, but you know, some of these things might be overlooked from the initial triage or review, or you know, someone might not have had context. So if you could build these types of things, like for example, like the JDBC, like that knows you're probably going to at some point, like, or like, let's say you had a MS SQL query, like a MS SQL connection string there too. Like that would then give you indication that actually, like, we just included this, which means there's going to be SQL, you know, at some point in this code base, which means we probably should also be having the security rules for, you know, let's say SQL injection being ran against this code base too. And like, you know, you could take that type of stuff, or like, you know, for Postgres, like, you know, there's going to be, like, when you see JDBC, you know that there's going to be some type of database connection string. So I think that's like super important for like making security decisions, and also how you potentially approach a code base as well, which obviously would be good for bug hunters, which also obviously would be good for like organizations who are, you know, trying to make sure that these types of vulnerabilities don't occur in their systems. Obviously, if this is just informational stuff, but having information about a code base gives you a lot more indication of where you should start hunting for types of issues.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing we are starting to work on, this isn't like publicly advertised very much yet, but we are looking to do, I think, very much what you said, which is like, what information can we gather about a repo? And then can we automatically make sure that we're running the right rules to give you security coverage? So for example, like, hey, we see you are a Flask app, so let's make sure that you're running all the Flask rules. Or we see that you're using JDBC, so let's make sure we're running all the SQL injection rules. So that is something that we're like prototyping right now. It's not fully ready, but I would say in the next couple of quarters, that would be probably just built-in default functionality where you're just always sure that you're running the right things. Even as we publish new rules, you're just like constantly getting better coverage, basically like autonomously. So
super interesting. So I think that's probably a good place to end.
Sorry, can I do one quick example?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. This is my favorite example, and I should have saved it for last.
No, you do you. I still have time. It's okay. I just obviously want to be courteous of your time as well.
I like hanging out with you.
Okay, good.
So let's say we want to audit routes.
Yep.
So let's say we don't know what this repo uses. So let's just search for an HTTP verb like post. This is sometimes how I do it. All right, so we see some comments. Maybe. Okay, like this looks exciting. Okay, so here we see what looks like a bunch of routes where we are defining the HTTP verb, describing it, giving it a path. And then we see this auth-z annotation, which looks interesting. Okay, so let's say we want to find all of the routes. So let's look at how we can do that in a repo we just started looking at in like 5 minutes. Okay, so basically we're like, okay, this is what a route looks like. So let's just copy that in here. Let's see, let's fix the formatting a little bit. Here. Okay, so there could be multiple HTTP verbs. So let's like maybe ignore that for now. Let's just say that like if it has an API operation annotation, it's probably a route. We don't know what that text is. Let's maybe not worry about the path for now. Let's not worry about that. Let's see, like we don't know what the type is going to be. So maybe we don't care about that. Maybe we don't care about what the function is. Arguments could be anything. Let's maybe not worry about throws exception. And then the body, this could be anything. But basically, this is sort of the essence of what a route is, at least in this case. So
I like that you don't have to be so super kind of constrained into like defining what things are. You can just have the very basic things that are going to live inside a function, like get, delete, post, etc. And you know that one thing is going to be contained there. Like normally the @get, post, delete, etc. might be there. There might not always be an API operation because they aren't always required, for example. But yeah, so like that would be very like, or like @path probably is always required for these types of things. Yeah, so I like that you don't have to be so so controlled over this though, which is I think is super cool.
Cool. So yeah, going from 0 to extracting routes in about like 2 minutes, we've now found what looks like 62 routes. So like, this in itself is pretty cool. Let's say we want to find all routes that don't have this annotation, right? So we see like user a couple places. I think I saw like admin somewhere as well, but let's just say like doesn't require any auth. So basically what we could do is add again, a pattern not. We can just copy this guy in. Say, so what is it? At secured. Okay. Secured. We don't care what's in there. And then the rest of this is the same. So basically, like find all functions. We don't care anything about it other than it has this path annotation, and filter out all the cases that have this secured annotation. So this is basically like exactly what we mean if we like describe it verbally. So if we run that, cool, we found 3.
Which definitely is better than 62 or however much it was before.
Yeah. So this one doesn't have it. This one is in Q admin resource. So this is interesting. Yeah, so probably this is like one of the first things I would audit, right? Like, hey, this is like in an admin resource or a Q admin controller. It doesn't require auth. Like, okay.
Exactly.
Actually,
yeah.
And it's like, oh, so like all of the rest of these are at secured admin, but like, why is this one not? Like, that's interesting.
Yeah, and especially if you knew that your code base specifically required like a at secured, like sometimes like these are handled outside of the actual like code here. Sometimes they're done at like kind of middleware at the beginning if it's like in a Spring application or something. But yeah, realistically, like this is actually, especially when you have context to the apps, like this is very powerful because like probably in your admin routes, there's never going to be a public route that lives inside this. Like why would there be? Like realistically, it probably should be refactored outside of the admin, folder if it's supposed to be public. So that's very. Like to be honest, like that would save someone a lot of time especially if they were looking at common themed code bases. So sometimes there's organizations that use like either the same kind of methodology, or they use like a kind of boilerplate creation piece which all code comes from, and normally they have like the same type of annotation. Not always. There's nuanced all the time, right? It could never be like that. Every code base could be different, but this is super helpful. I think would be for triaging locally for organizations, or if you were just looking for like you want to see all the routes and okay, this is where I'm going to start. You could obviously do that in Visual Code too. Like you could just search for app post but then you would have to like build a regex to look for all those things.
Yeah.
Where if you obviously, and you can do regular expression here too, but realistically, like if you could just have that and then look for particular things against that too would be also very cool. But
yeah, the thing about regexes is that you can't very well regex for the absence of something. Like here we're looking for the absence of @secured, and also like the ordering of them could be different. So actually for annotations, because the order doesn't matter, Semgrep doesn't care, right? So the order here could be anything, and it doesn't matter to Semgrep.
Yeah.
And actually, a friend of mine from DoyenSec actually used this sort of exact approach recently. He was like, hey, I was auditing this repo that had like 300 controllers, and he found some weird auth pattern. And he was able to narrow down his manual review from like 300 different controllers to like 6, using like a very simple Semgrep rule to just say like, oh, this is what the weird thing is. And then he just had to manually audit 6 out of like 300 controllers, which takes it, in my experience, from like infeasible to like, oh yeah, I can do that in like a few hours.
But yeah, I've definitely been in that scenario quite a few times. Like imagine like you get given a code base, like they are using something similar to this syntax. If you could just go, I don't want to see anything with admin right now because I've looked at the functionality for that and it's fine. Like it looks reasonable. There's no way to bypass it in some sense. Obviously there could be vulnerabilities inside the function, so they probably do need to be triaged. But if you're just looking at the initial like missing authorization or like missing authentication in some scenarios and being able to write a rule, like that is definitely going to save you many hours in like rather than trying to go through each. So I have done this, you know, I put my hands up in the air.
Every pen tester has done this.
I have
for
done
sure.
this where I've done app posts and I've gone through Visual Studio Code and looked at every single one in the past. So, you know, I've definitely been there. And if I could have like saved myself time by looking at one function, understanding how it works and going, okay, if, you know, that it contains like either, you know, is admin or secured admin or contains like is authorized, for example, ignore it for now because I will come back and review these. But for now, I need to just take a look. And like you could also look for like the missing use of like, you know, if it produces like text HTML, like for example, that could also be like let's look for XSS, for example. Like if it only produces like application JSON, it's less likely to be vulnerable to obviously XSS because the way it's going to be rendered isn't going to be in that context, right? So that type of stuff is really helpful. And like, you know, looking for anything that produces HTML, obviously you could build more, you know, data flow type rules too, which may contain these types of patterns as well. But obviously in most scenarios, that's going to be a lot more past this demo. So
yeah. This is just the beginning. Like you could, for example, like one thing you pointed out is like, well, if we see something that doesn't have @SecurityAdmin in an admin resource, like that's interesting. So you could actually do something. We're not going to fully do it here, but you could do something like pattern not inside, and then say like, you know, like public class, I don't know, class, and then you could do something like variable regex, where your variable is. So this is, I'm just like spitballing here, so the syntax is probably slightly wrong, but
yeah, exactly, yeah.
do something like that, and then change this like admin or something. So basically, like with Semgrep, you could quickly hash out something that's like, find every class that is an admin class, and if any route in that class doesn't have @SecurityAdmin, so that would flag.
Yeah, because that would basically, rather than showing you all the things, it would show you like this very specific nuanced stuff.
Yeah, so say like this is user or like foo or like I don't know, like as long as like either if it doesn't have this annotation or if it doesn't have specifically @SecurityAdmin, then this would flag it. Like something like this. Again, I would need to like think a little bit more carefully. I'm cognizant of your time, but basically this idea, you can very quickly be as specific as you want. And all of the meta variables you're using are passed in the JSON output. So if you wanted to like write a script which would like take the path and like pipe that into burp or do something else, you could do that too.
Got it. All right. Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. I'm very glad that you told me to be quiet for a second, and and I said that you wanted to show me that last thing because that was fantastic. And to be honest, like if I could leverage something like that in a lot of assessments, it'd be very good. So I do appreciate.
Well, you can. It's open source.
It's open source and it's free. So if anyone is interested, feel free, like definitely check out Semgrep. So Clint, thank you for your time. I know we definitely went way over time, but I'm happy that we did because I got to learn something new. I'm sure the people that are watching and who watch the VOD, it's going to be split up into multiple sections. So if they just want to watch Semgrep, they can. If they want to learn about improv, etc., they can also check that out as well. But thank you for your time. I appreciate the over hour that we spent together, and I'm looking forward to bringing you on again at some time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Lewis. It was a lot of fun. Talk soon.
This was the 9th episode of SecuriTEA and Crumpets. Please join us on the 15th of July for the next SecuriTEA and Crumpets, where we'll have Brakeman Security, Justin Collins, come on and talk about Brakeman. So see you next time.